The doctor told me something I had been too afraid to admit to anyone. And that same evening, during dinner, my daughter announced, "Mom, Samuel and I have decided it would be best for you to stay in a retirement home." I nodded silently, packed my things the next day, and left. And when they came to visit me 3 months later, Dr. Marshall took off his glasses and cleaned them with slow, deliberate movements. The lenses gleamed under the cold light of the fluorescent lamps. Margaret Kingston watched these gestures and thought that in her 37 years of teaching, she had seen this move 1,000 times when a teacher had to break bad news to a parent about their child. The office smelled of antiseptic and fear. On the wall hung Dr. Marshall's diploma, 40 years of medical practice. 40 years of bad news. Outside, October rain drummed on the window like the fingers of a nervous patient on a desk. "Maggie," he began, using the diminutive form of her name. That was a bad sign. Doctors only switched to first names when medical terms were too harsh. The results of the full examination confirmed our concerns. Margaret clasped her hands on her lap. Her hands were cold, though the office was warm. At 62, she had learned how to face bad news with dignity. Robert's death 10 years ago had taught her well. A heart attack at 48, no warning, no goodbye. Just collapsed over breakfast, and that was it. Olivia had been 24 then, just finished university and planning her wedding. Margaret had to be strong. There was no choice. "The MRI shows characteristic changes in the hippocampus and parietal cortex," the doctor continued, opening a thick folder of results. "The PET scan revealed decreased glucose metabolism in key brain regions. Neuropsychological tests confirm cognitive impairments typical of early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Margaret nodded, as if he'd just given her the weather forecast. "How much time do I have?" The question came out casually, as if she were asking about the next bus. But inside, something was screaming, thrashing, begging for one more chance, one more day, one more morning. With standard treatment, 3 to 5 years of relatively normal life. But there is some good news. A clinical trial is starting at St. Joseph's Clinic. Memantine XR, Phase 3 trials. Early results show a 70% slowing in disease progression. Maybe, possibly. Those words didn't heal, but they didn't destroy either. "I need to think," Margaret said. "Of course. But remember, starting therapy early gives the best chance. Here's the contact info for Dr. Weber. He's in charge of the program." Margaret took the card, gathered her purse, and shook the doctor's hand. The usual familiar motions, as if she had just left a parent-teacher conference and was now heading home to make dinner. When she exited the hospital, she sat in her old Honda Civic, just staring at the autumn leaves swirling through the air like golden memories. How strange. Just that morning, her biggest worry was that Olivia hadn't called again over the weekend. And now, time had taken on a new meaning, finite, measurable, precious. Her phone vibrated, a message from her daughter. "Mom, dinner's at 6 today. We need to talk about something." Margaret read the message twice. Something in its tone struck her as unsettling. Olivia never scheduled family talks. Everything usually happened on the go, in a rush. Olivia and Samuel's house was a picture of middle-class American dreams. 2-story colonial style, manicured lawn, minivan in the garage. Attached to the house was a small guest suite, where Margaret had lived for the past 5 years. After Robert died, the big house had started to feel like a museum of memories. And when 34-year-old Olivia suggested she move in with them, it seemed like the logical thing to do. Now Margaret understood that logic and happiness were not the same. There was an unnatural silence at the dinner table. Olivia nervously pushed food around on her plate. Mashed potatoes, peas, chicken breast, everything arranged in neat sections, nothing touching. Her entire life was like that, orderly, compartmentalized, no surprises. Samuel cleared his throat and began in the tone he used for presentations at his insurance firm. A 36-year-old man with a tidy beard and a perpetually concerned expression, He always looked like he was solving someone else's problem. Maggie, Olivia and I have been thinking a lot about your well-being. About your future, Mom, Olivia interrupted without lifting her gaze from her plate. You've been living with us for 5 years now, and we can see how lonely you are. Margaret slowly set her fork down. The day seemed determined to outdo itself in unpleasant surprises. Lonely? Well, yes. Samuel leaned forward with the enthusiasm of a salesman sensing a done deal. You're alone all day while we're at work. You read, watch TV, stroll in the garden. That's not really a life for someone as active as you. Active? Margaret nearly laughed. The last time anyone had called her active was a decade ago, back when she still worked and ran the school drama club. And at Golden Autumn, it's a new assisted living facility in Maplewood. There are so many opportunities, Samuel continued. Interest groups, excursions, a library, art studio, medical care. Mom, Olivia finally looked up. Her eyes were a mixture of guilt and resolve. Samuel and I think it would be better for you to live in the residence. You won't be alone there. You'll have friends your age, professional care, activities. The words lingered in the air, heavy and final. Margaret looked at her daughter and saw echoes of the little girl who used to come to her bedroom after a nightmare. But now the nightmare was real, and there was nowhere to hide. We've already arranged everything, Samuel added quickly. Paid for the first 3 months. It's a great place, really. Overlooks a lake. Excellent reputation. You deserve better than sitting here in solitude. Deserve, Margaret repeated the word to herself silently. She wondered, what did she really deserve? 40 years of marriage to a man who made all the decisions? 34 years of motherhood, where every day was dictated by her daughter's needs? 5 years of living on borrowed space in someone else's house? She thought about the MRI results lying in her purse, about how, in a year or two, she might forget her own daughter's name, about how she would wander the house, no longer recognizing familiar faces, about how she would become a burden to these people who already barely tolerated her. All right, she said. Olivia blinked. All right, what? All right, I agree. When should I be ready? The couple exchanged glances. They had clearly prepared for a long negotiation, for tears, maybe even a scene. Tomorrow, Olivia said uncertainly. If you don't need more time to pack, number tomorrow is fine. Margaret rose from the table, leaving her dinner unfinished. Good night. That night, Margaret hardly slept. She lay awake thinking about the day ahead, the new life that would begin in the morning, and she couldn't help remembering. 28 years ago, a sunny May day. 6-year-old Olivia in a yellow dress ran ahead, picking dandelions. They were walking home from the park, and Margaret cherished these rare moments when she could simply be a mother, not a wife, not a teacher, not a housekeeper. Mom, look! Olivia showed her a bouquet of picked flowers. These are for you. Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful. They passed a house with a lovely porch when they heard yelling. A woman in her 40s was coming out, practically dragging an elderly lady in a worn coat behind her. Sit down already, Mom. I don't have time for your theatrics, the woman snapped. The elderly woman tried to speak, but her daughter cut her off. You're nothing but trouble. Why couldn't you just live like normal people? You ruin everything. She shoved her mother toward the car. Well, you'll see, Mom. Living in my house was heaven compared to the nursing home. The old woman obediently got into the car, and Margaret saw tears on her face. The woman slammed the door and drove off quickly, not even checking if her mother had fastened her seatbelt. Little Olivia clutched her mother's hand tightly. Mom, why did that lady speak so badly to her mom? Why doesn't she love her? Margaret crouched to her daughter's eye level. You know, sweetheart, sometimes people forget that their parents were once young too. They forget how much love and care they received. They start thinking of their parents only as a burden, not a gift. Will you love me when I grow up? Always sunshine, and you'll love me too, right? Of course, Olivia hugged her mom's neck. I'll never yell at you like that mean lady. I'll take care of you when you're old." Margaret hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the smell of her hair, and thought, "God grant that life never teaches you to forget these words." Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks as she lay in the dark. How naive she had been then. How naive they both had been. Olivia had kept her promise. She didn't yell at her mother. She was polite, composed, even caring. But in her eyes, Margaret saw the same irritation, the same quiet desire to be rid of a burden as she had seen in that woman 28 years ago. Life had taught Olivia to be more civilized. Instead of shouting, calm arguments about well-being. Instead of harshness, concern for better conditions. But the essence was the same. Early in the morning, before breakfast, Margaret called St. Joseph's Clinic and scheduled a consultation with Dr. Weber about participating in the experimental treatment. "You can come the day after tomorrow," the secretary said. "Dr. Weber leads the clinical trials for a new Alzheimer's treatment." Then Margaret methodically packed her things. She was surprised by how little she truly needed. Some photographs, a few favorite books, warm clothes. What took up the most space were her journals, which she had kept for years, and a box of letters. Letters she had written to Olivia but never sent. The move to Golden Autumn took place the day after the family meeting. In the morning, Olivia and Samuel helped load her things into the car. They bustled, trying to seem caring, but the relief in their eyes was too obvious. "Mom, we'll visit every weekend," Olivia promised at the entrance to the home. "Of course, dear. And call if you need anything." Absolutely. The goodbye hug was formal, awkward. They had both forgotten how to be close. The room turned out to be cozy and bright. Grace greeted her new roommate with a can of beer in hand. "Welcome to the Club of the Unwanted," said the 70-year-old woman cheerfully with short gray hair. "Rule number 1, don't snitch to the staff about my beer. Technically, this place is dry, but at 70, this is my last pleasure. I'm Margaret, or Maggie." "Grace? And just so you know," I snore, but not too loudly. The first few days of adjustment were slow. Margaret was getting used to the new routine, new faces, new rules. On the third day, she went to St. Joseph's Clinic for her consultation with Dr. Weber. "Participation in the trial is completely voluntary," explained the program director. "It's a placebo-controlled, double-blind study. 50% chance you'll receive the active drug, Memantine XR. How often do I need to come?" "Weekly for the first 2 months, then monthly. Each visit includes tests, lab work, and a session with a psychologist." "Any side effects?" "Nausea, dizziness, sleep disturbances are possible. In rare cases, hallucinations. All reversible upon discontinuation." Participation in the clinical trial began a week after her move. Every Wednesday, she went to the clinic, gave samples, did tests, and spoke with Dr. Weber. "How are you feeling?" he asked on the second visit. "Nausea in the mornings, light dizziness. That could be either the drug or a stress response from the move. We'll keep monitoring." Margaret didn't know whether she was receiving the active drug or the placebo, but something was definitely changing. Her focus improved. Her memory felt sharper. Maybe it was the placebo. Maybe it was hope. She started attending the art studio. The instructor, Jonathan Wilson, turned out to be a man of about 67 with attentive gray eyes and calm manners. Tall, slightly stooped, he moved carefully, like someone who had recently experienced a loss. "What would you like to paint?" he asked during the first session, guiding Margaret to the easel. "A house," she answered, surprising herself. "The house I grew up in." "Then let's start with the sky. What does it look like in your most vivid memories?" Margaret thought of the Vermont farm where she spent her childhood. "Blue, very blue. I was 8. My grandfather was teaching me how to ride a bike." "Let's begin with that blue sky." The brush fit naturally in her hand. A 40-year break from painting had turned out to be just a long inhale. Meanwhile, in the house Margaret had left behind, tension was building. Samuel was staying later and later at work, and when he came home, he was quiet and irritable. Olivia chalked it up to stress: her mother's move, the financial burden of the care home, pressure at work. But the truth was far worse. Samuel had lost his job 3 weeks earlier. Layoffs at the insurance company had affected half the staff, and he was among the excess. But he hadn't dared tell his wife. Every morning he left the house, spent the day job hunting, sending out resumes, going to interviews, and each night he came home with lies on his lips. The money was disappearing fast. The payment for the care home, $2,800 a month. The mortgage, $3,200. Car loan, insurance, utilities. The savings were quickly running out. By mid-November, Samuel realized he couldn't keep the secret much longer. But by then, the situation had become critical. "Sam, what's going on with you?" Olivia asked over dinner. "You look awful." "Problems at work." "What kind of problems?" "Possible layoffs." Olivia set down her fork. "You're getting laid off?" "Possibly." He couldn't tell the truth. Couldn't admit that he'd been lying every day for 2 months, that the idea of sending her mother to the care home hadn't come from concern, but desperation. By the end of November, the crisis peaked. Olivia found a letter from the bank in the mailbox, notice of an overdue credit card payment. "Sam, what is this?" she asked, her hands trembling. He looked at her and knew. He couldn't lie anymore. "I lost my job 2 months ago." The world crumbled. 2 months? Olivia stared at her husband like he was a stranger. "You've been lying to me for 2 months?" "I wanted to find a new job before you found out. That's why you pushed so hard for the care home." The realization hit like a blow. You needed the money. "Ollie, it wasn't just about the money." "No, it was exactly about the money. You knew you couldn't support her and decided to get rid of her." Samuel sank onto the couch. He no longer had the strength to lie, to wriggle, to invent excuses. "Yes, partly yes, but I really thought it would be better for her, among people her own age." "Get out." "What?" "Get out of the house. Now I need time to think." "Ollie, please." "No, you lied to me for 2 months. You used my mother as a bargaining chip in your financial game. Get out." Samuel packed a bag and went to stay with his brother. Olivia was left alone in the house, which now felt enormous and empty. That same night, she started spotting. First just a little, then more. By morning, it was clear. A miscarriage. She hadn't even known she was pregnant. It was only 4 weeks. Most women wouldn't have noticed yet. At the hospital, they told her what she already knew in her heart. "Early miscarriage is quite common," the doctor explained. "No one's fault. You can try again in a few months." Olivia lay in the hospital room, thinking about how in 1 week she had lost her husband, her mother, and a child she hadn't known existed. While the family drama unfolded in the house she had left behind, Margaret was slowly coming back to life. The treatment was working. Her memory remained sharp. Her ability to concentrate had even improved. Dr. Weber was pleased with the test results. "Your metrics are stable," he said during the December visit. "The disease isn't progressing, for now." That's very good news. At the care home, Margaret found something she hadn't had in years, a daily rhythm that depended only on her. Breakfast at 8, art studio at 10, a walk in the garden after lunch, reading before bed. No one asked what she was cooking for dinner. No one needed shirts ironed. No one demanded constant attention. She and Jonathan started seeing each other every day, at first only during painting classes, then evening walks in the garden, talks in the library. "Tell me about your life before the care home," he asked in late November, when they were sitting in the conservatory watching the first snowfall. 40 years of marriage, 34 years of motherhood, 5 years living as a guest in my daughter's home," Margaret answered briefly. "And you?" 40 years married to Ella, 2 years a widower." "Was it hard?" Jonathan paused, thinking. "At first it felt like I couldn't breathe without her. Then I realized grief is also a form of love, a way to stay connected to the one you've lost." But at some point, you have to give yourself permission to live again. And have you? I'm trying. Art therapy helps. When you teach others to see beauty in life, you begin to see it again, too. Over 2 months, a real friendship developed between them. Jonathan was the complete opposite of Robert. He didn't try to make decisions for her, didn't offer advice she hadn't asked for. He simply listened and understood. "You know," Margaret said on New Year's Eve, "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be interesting to someone. And I'd forgotten what it's like to talk to someone who understands you without a word." By January, their relationship had become more intimate, not passionate. At their age, that wasn't the point, but full of tenderness, care, and deep understanding. Samuel spent the Christmas holidays in a motel, renting a tiny room for $40 a night. Olivia wasn't answering his calls, there was no work, and debts were piling up. He went to interviews, but in the eyes of employers, he saw the same skepticism. Why had such an experienced professional been jobless for so long? In mid-January, Salvation came. A small insurance company offered him a position as an agent. The salary was half of what he used to earn, but he had no other choice. After getting the job, Samuel made a desperate move. He went to visit Margaret at the care home. He hadn't seen his mother-in-law in over 3 months, and the change in her stunned him. She looked younger, more confident, even dressed differently. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," he said, standing in her room while Grace tactfully stepped out, "but I want to explain." Margaret listened to his story about the fear of losing his job, the panic over mounting debt, and how he convinced himself that the care home was truly better for her. "I'm not making excuses," he finished. "I panicked. Instead of telling Olivia the truth, I dealt with the problem at your expense. I used you." Margaret was silent for a long time. "Thank you for your honesty," she finally said, "even if it comes very late." "Maggie, I want to make things right. Olivia won't speak to me, but—" "Samuel," Margaret interrupted, "you and Olivia are adults. You have to sort out your problems yourselves. As for me, come visit when you can, without guilt or obligation, just because." In February, while clearing out the guest suite to rent it out, they needed every possible source of income, Olivia came across a cardboard box hidden deep in her mother's closet. Inside were letters, many letters, neatly folded and dated. All addressed to her, but none bore a postmark. "My dear Olivia," she read from one letter, dated the day of her high school graduation. "Today, you finished school, and I'm so proud of you. I know you think I'm too strict, too demanding, but everything I do out of love. Your father always said I care about you more than I care about myself. Maybe that's true. When he died, I swore I'd give you everything I couldn't give myself. The freedom to choose, the chance to live your own life, not just fulfill others' expectations." Another letter written on her wedding day. "I'm giving you to a good man, Samuel. Take care of her. She's everything I have in this world. But remember, she doesn't belong to you or to me. She belongs only to herself. Don't let her forget that, the way I once did." And the last one, dated the previous year. "I know I've become a burden. I know you feel guilty for not being able to give me a better life. But know this, these 5 years with you have been the happiest since your father died. Every morning I woke up knowing I was needed, that I mattered, that I was loved. Thank you for letting me stay close, and I'm sorry I never learned how to show you how much you mean to me." Olivia cried over those letters all night, cried from shame, from grief, from the realization of what she had missed. Her mother had loved her, had been proud of her, had thanked her for the opportunity to be close, and all Olivia had seen was a burden. The next morning, she called the care home. "Good afternoon. This is Olivia Kingston. I'd like to know how my mother is doing." "Oh, Mrs. Kingston is wonderful." The administrator's voice was full of enthusiasm. "She's very active, painting, and she's become close friends with Mr. Wilson. Actually, they're preparing for an exhibition." "An exhibition? Didn't she tell you? Her work will be shown in the Maplewood Gallery in March. Mr. Wilson arranged it. He's well connected with the gallery's owner, We're all so proud." Olivia hung up and felt a tightness in her chest. Her mother, whom she had thought broken and lifeless, was preparing for her own art exhibition, and she, the daughter, had to learn about it from a stranger. That same day, Olivia called Samuel. They hadn't spoken in 2 months. "We need to talk," she said. They met at a cafe near their house. Samuel looked older, tired. "I found my mom's letters," Olivia said without preamble. "What letters?" "The ones she wrote to me her whole life but never sent. She loved me, Sam. She loved me and thanked me for letting her live nearby. And all I saw was a burden." Samuel was silent. "We're both to blame," Olivia continued. "You lied to me about your job, and I believed my mother was in our way. We used her as a scapegoat for our problems." "I want to make things right," Samuel said quietly. "So do I, but not with each other, first with my mom. She deserves to know the truth." "And us?" Samuel looked at her with hope. "I don't know. First, we need to face my mother. Then we'll see if we're still the kind of people who can trust each other." They decided to go together to see Margaret and tell her the whole truth. March brought the long-awaited exhibition. In 6 months of painting, Margaret had created 18 works, from timid early sketches to confident, light-filled pieces. Jonathan, using his connections in the local art community, arranged the showing at the Maplewood Gallery. The gallery was small but cozy. White walls, spotlighting, wooden floors. Margaret's works were hung throughout. Landscapes, still lifes, portraits. The centerpiece was a triptych of self-portraits showing a woman at different stages of life. "It's a story about how sometimes you have to lose yourself in order to find yourself again," Margaret explained to visitors. Residents from the care home came, as well as local artists and art lovers. Even the town mayor stopped by and spent a long time studying a painting of an autumn garden. Margaret wore a new blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion. Jonathan stood beside her, playing the role of proud companion and exhibition curator. "Maggie, you're absolutely glowing," Grace exclaimed, who had come despite still recovering from a recent cold. Margaret truly felt like she was in a fairy tale. At 62, for the first time in her life, she was the center of attention for her own accomplishments, not as someone's wife or mother. "Is that your daughter?" an older woman asked, pointing to a portrait of a little girl on a swing. "Yes, from her childhood. I painted it from memory." "And that one?" "That's my childhood home, a farm in Vermont. It was torn down 20 years ago, but every detail is still in my memory." By the middle of the evening, several paintings had already been sold. Margaret hadn't expected that. She painted for the soul, not for profit. At that moment, the gallery door opened, and Olivia and Samuel walked in. Olivia stopped at the entrance, unable to believe her eyes. The mother she remembered as tired, subdued, resigned to fate, now stood at the center of attention, smiling, chatting with people. She looked happy, alive in a way she hadn't looked in years. Beside her stood a tall, silver-haired man in a fine suit, looking at her with open tenderness and pride. On her mother's wrist, a new bracelet. In her ears, earrings Olivia had never seen. Even her hairstyle was different, not the usual tight bun, but soft waves. "Mom?" Olivia approached hesitantly. Margaret turned. For a second, surprise flashed in her eyes, then wariness. "Olivia, Samuel, you came." "We didn't know about the exhibition," Olivia murmured. "The care home told us." "Meet Jonathan," Margaret said nervously. "Jonathan Wilson. He runs our art studio. This is my daughter, Olivia, and her husband, Samuel." Jonathan extended his hand with genuine warmth. "Pleasure to meet you. Your mother is a remarkable artist, and a remarkable woman." Olivia shook his hand mechanically but couldn't take her eyes off the paintings. She recognized the house from her childhood, the garden she had played in. She saw a portrait of herself, not photographic, but emotional, showing what her mother had seen in her: love, pride, tenderness. What struck her most was the series of self-portraits. Margaret portrayed at different stages of her life, with the last showing a woman who had finally found herself. "Mom, we need to talk," Olivia said quietly. "Of course, dear. Jonathan, could you—" "I'll wait in the car," he said, understanding. They sat in a small cafe near the gallery. The March evening was chilly, streetlights reflected in the windows. Margaret ordered a cappuccino, Olivia just water. Samuel remained silent, understanding this was a conversation between mother and daughter. "You look well," Olivia began. "Thank you." "Better than when you lived with us." Margaret sipped her coffee, considering her words. "I'm glad you came, but why now? You didn't visit me once in 6 months." Olivia pulled neatly folded pages from her purse, the letters she had found at home. "Why did you never send them?" Margaret recognized her own handwriting and paled. "Where did you find these?" "I was clearing out your things from the guest suite. Sam lost his job. We need the money." Olivia's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" "Tell you what?" "That you love us. That we matter to you. My whole life I thought you just wanted to control me. That you didn't care what happened to me." Margaret set down her cup. Her hands trembled slightly. "Because you already felt guilty that I lived with you. Why make it worse? What if I wanted to feel needed? What if I wanted to know that my mother loved me, not just tolerated me out of duty?" "You did know." "No." Olivia raised her voice, then calmed herself. "No, Mom. I thought I was just fulfilling a daughter's obligation, the way you once fulfilled a mother's." Margaret flinched at the pain in her daughter's voice. "Ollie." "I had a miscarriage," Olivia said suddenly. "In December. I lost a child I didn't even know I was carrying. And the one person who could have understood was here, painting pictures because I was too selfish to—" She couldn't finish. She began to cry. Margaret moved to her side and hugged her, for the first time in years, truly, without formality. "Forgive me," Olivia whispered. "Forgive me for sending you here, for not being there when you might have needed me." "I have something to tell you," Margaret said softly, "and you need to know." Back in her care home room, Margaret took a thick folder of medical documents from her desk drawer. Grace had gone to the library, leaving them alone. "Alzheimer's," Margaret said without preamble, handing over the test results. "Early stage. I found out the same day you told me about the care home." Olivia froze, staring at the medical terms she didn't understand, but whose meaning was all too clear. "What?" "I'm in an experimental treatment program at St. Joseph's Clinic. A new drug, Memantine XR, phase 3 trials. So far, the disease isn't progressing, but that doesn't mean it's curable." "Mom," Olivia clutched her hands, "why didn't you tell me?" "Why? You already wanted to be rid of me. Why give you a reason to feel like noble martyrs?" I never would have." "Really?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Ollie, I've lived 62 years. 40 of those I spent trying to be needed by other people, by a husband who made every decision, by you when you were small, and again when I moved into your home. We didn't have problems." "Ollie, do you think I'm blind?" Margaret cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "You'd come home and cry in the bathroom after each failed pregnancy test. Samuel stayed later and later at work. You stopped talking at dinner, only politely asking about each other's day." Olivia said nothing, realizing there was no use denying it. "When the doctor told me the diagnosis, for the first time in years, I didn't think about how it would affect others. I thought about what I wanted, and I realized I want to be happy, at least for the last years of my life." "And are you? Happy? Here?" Margaret looked out the window where residents were walking in the garden. "Yes, I have real friends. I have a passion that brings me joy and brings joy to others. I have purpose. I keep a detailed journal, recording everything important while I still can, for you, so you'll know who I really was. And I have—" She paused. "Perhaps love." "Come home," Olivia said. "Mom, come home. We'll fix everything. I'll be different. We'll take care of you." Ollie, stop. No, really. We'll find the best doctors, the best treatments. I'll learn everything about your illness. I'll help with the meds. Olivia! Her daughter fell silent. I don't want to come home. The words were quiet, but final. What? I don't want to come back. My home is here. My life is here. My friends are here. Olivia looked as if she'd been struck. But we're family. Yes, and that's exactly why we need to start over, Margaret said, taking her daughter's hands. Not as mother and daughter living together out of inertia and obligation, but as two grown women who choose to be in each other's lives. I don't understand. I want to know your struggles not because I live in the next room and hear you cry. I want you to tell me, because you trust me, because you need my thoughts, my support. I do trust you. Then tell me about the miscarriage. Tell me how you feel. Tell me what you're afraid of. Olivia cried again, but this time the tears were different, not from despair, but from relief. I'm afraid I'll never be able to get pregnant again. I'm afraid Samuel will leave me when he realizes I can't give him children. I'm afraid I've been as much of a failure as a mother as I was as a daughter. You weren't a failure as a daughter. You were a daughter trying to live her own life. That's okay. And you weren't a failure as a mother. You just forgot who you were outside of the role of being a mom. They sat in silence until Olivia calmed down. What do we do now? She asked. Start over. You'll come visit not out of duty, but because you want to. You'll tell me about your life, and I'll tell you about mine. We'll try to become friends. When Jonathan joined them, the tension in the air was palpable. He was more nervous than a groom on his wedding day. Olivia, he began formally, I know we met under unusual circumstances, and I know your mother means a lot to you. I just wanted to say that she means a lot to me too. Olivia studied his face, trying to understand the man in front of her. Do you know about her diagnosis? Yes, your mother told me in January. And that doesn't scare you? Jonathan looked at Margaret with such tenderness that Olivia's breath caught. What scares me is wasting the time we have. I've already lost a wife I loved. 40 years of marriage, and I know what it means to regret the words you didn't say, the days you didn't live fully. You love her? Yes. Mom. Margaret nodded. I wasn't looking for love, Ollie. At my age, with my diagnosis, I thought I was too old. But sometimes love finds you when you least expect it. Olivia wiped her eyes. Then you have my blessing. Both of you. Thank you, Jonathan exhaled with relief. That means a lot to us. But I have one condition, Olivia added. I want to be part of your life, a real part. I want to know your plans, to help, to be close. I would love that, Margaret said sincerely. I have a suggestion, Margaret said as the three of them sat in the care home's garden. The April air was fresh and cool, the first spring flowers pushing through last year's leaves. The money from the paintings, it turned out to be more than I expected. 3 were bought by private collectors and 2 were commissioned by the city library. I want you to use it for fertility treatment. Mom, we can't. You can. It's my gift, my investment in the future of our family. Samuel, who had remained silent most of the evening, burning with shame over his past actions, finally spoke. Maggie, I owe you an apology. The care home idea, it wasn't just about your well-being. I know, Margaret replied calmly. You know. Samuel, I'm not blind. I saw your worried faces, heard the late-night talks about money, but you know what? Maybe it was for the best. If it hadn't been for your difficult situation, I would never have dared to change. And it turned out I needed change, not safety. She took her daughter's hand. Ollie, I want to ask you one thing. When you have a child, and you will, I'm sure of it, don't make the same mistake I did. What mistake? Don't lose yourself entirely in motherhood. Stay yourself. A child needs a mother who knows who she is, who lives a full life, not just fulfills maternal duties. Olivia nodded, still processing everything. What if the disease progresses? Then we'll be ready. I have my journals, my paintings, the letters I've finally started sending you. You'll have support. Jonathan promised he won't leave me. And your child will have a grandmother who loved life until her last day. The following November, Margaret held her granddaughter, little Ella, named after Jonathan's late wife. The birth had gone smoothly, and the fertility treatment was successful on the first attempt. The Alzheimer's continued to progress slowly. The experimental treatment was working. Margaret still recognized her loved ones, retained clarity of thought, and continued painting. Jonathan proposed in June, on the anniversary of their meeting. They married in a small ceremony in the care home's garden. After long negotiations, the administration provided them with a family suite. Olivia visited every weekend, sometimes with Samuel, sometimes alone. She and her husband went through family therapy and slowly rebuilt their relationship, learning how to be honest with each other. Samuel found a better job at a larger company. The salary wasn't as high as before, but it was stable. He also began seeing a therapist, working through his fears and tendency to hide problems. "Tell Ella about the day you learned to ride a bike," Olivia asked, watching her mother rock the baby. "It was a deep blue sky," Margaret said softly, gazing at the baby's sleepy face. "The air smelled of cinnamon from my mother's pie and freshly cut grass. Grandpa held the bike as I learned not to fall. Then he said, 'Don't be afraid to let go of the handlebars, Maggie. Sometimes you have to take a risk to feel real freedom.'" Little Ella yawned and snuggled closer to her grandmother. Jonathan sat nearby, sketching the moment, 3 generations of women connected by a love stronger than misunderstanding or pain. "And then what happened?" Olivia asked. "Then Grandpa let go of the bike, and I rode on my own. I remember the feeling of freedom, the wind in my hair, the sense that I could go anywhere." Margaret smiled. "It's just a shame it took me 62 years to feel that way again." Olivia took her mother's free hand. "But now we know what it really means to be free. And Ella will have a grandmother who'll teach her not to be afraid to let go." Outside, the season's first snow was falling, but the room was warm and full of light. Margaret looked at her sleeping granddaughter and thought that life is a strange thing. Sometimes it truly begins just when it seems to be ending. Grace peeked into the room, leaning on her cane. At 71, she was still full of energy and curiosity. "Well, how are the grandmas doing?" She winked at Olivia. "We're managing," Olivia smiled. "Mom's telling family stories." "Oh, that's important," Grace nodded seriously. "Stories are all that remain of us. They make us immortal." Margaret looked at the journal on her nightstand, her third thick notebook, filled with her neat handwriting, memories, thoughts, descriptions of each day. For Ella, for Olivia, for the future generations of their family. "You know," she said to her daughter, "when I got my diagnosis, I thought it was the end. But it turned out it was the beginning of honesty, the beginning of real closeness, the beginning of a life where I could finally be myself." Olivia leaned in and kissed her mother on the forehead. "Thank you for teaching me not to fear change. And you taught me it's never too late to ask for forgiveness and start over." Jonathan set his pencil down and showed them the sketch. Margaret holding her granddaughter, Olivia by her side, the 3 of them in a circle of light by the window. "This will be my next painting," he said, 3 generations. "And I'll write a letter to Ella," Margaret decided, "for her first birthday, and I'll write one every year for as long as I can hold a pen." Little Ella woke up and looked at her grandmother with serious dark eyes, the same ones little Olivia once had. "Hello, my darling," Margaret whispered. "Welcome to our family. We have so many stories to tell you." And in that moment, holding her granddaughter, surrounded by the love of her daughter and husband, Margaret knew that Alzheimer's had not taken away the most important thing, her ability to love and be loved. Everything else was just details. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in a blanket of silence and peace. But in that small room in the Golden Autumn Care Home, life itself reigned. Vivid, warm, full of hope and plans for the future. If you enjoyed the video, please support it with a like and a comment.